All right. Welcome back to our lecture series. Where we left off yesterday was with Hitler actually gaining power, excuse me, in Germany. And so Hitler has now been elected into office. And as soon as he takes over both the chancellorship and the office of the president, Hitler then begins to dismantle democracy within Germany, right? He has started a practice known as Gleichschalten, which is coordination between essentially every single aspect of civilian life and the Nazi Party, and so he's taken over everything. He's starting to build his totalitarian dictatorship, but he doesn't have complete control and complete authority yet, right? Even though he's now starting to call himself Der Fuhrer and is taking on these dictatorial powers, there are still some skeptics, and so Hitler has to be careful. He has already started the concentration camps, but those are mostly political prisoners at this point. And so they're communists or Labor Party leaders or anybody that he thinks can threaten his position of power. Now, it's what Hitler does next that is going to actually put him, into this, godlike status with the German people, and is really going to solidify his dictatorship. Hitler has plans for the world, and we know that from Mein Kampf. He had been talking about Lebensraum or living space, and so it is definitely clear that Hitler has plans to expand Germany. And he's going to go about doing that, pretty much right away. Now, there are some myths about what it is that Hitler actually intended for the world. You can watch, shows like Man in the High Castle today, which I will admit I have never seen. And, there are conspiracy theory shows on Netflix about how Hitler wanted to take over the world. There's really actually very little evidence for that. As a matter of fact, most historians believe, and there's evidence to suggest that it's true, is that Hitler never really intended to take over the entire world. As a matter of fact, what we believe is that his intentions were really, if he had his druthers, the world would be divided into four parts. With Germany controlling mainland Europe, with the actual continent of Europe, and just a part of Asia in the Soviet Union. We know that he definitely wants the western part of the Soviet Union. Then he believes that the Japanese, which he believes are a one of the superior racial groups in the world, can divide up Asia and control Asia as it sees fit. The Hitler also believes that America should control the Western Hemisphere. Now, he doesn't believe America will be successful controlling the Western Hemisphere because he believes that we're too racially diversified, and that ultimately the races won't get along well enough for American hegemony in the Western Hemisphere. But he's willing to let us try. Plus, he knows it's just too impractical to be able to invade the Western Hemisphere. And four, he really believes that Great Britain should be able to maintain its empire as it stands today. And they already, by this point, control about 20 to 25% of the planet. And so, those are kind of how Hitler sees, the world being divided up. Now, it won't happen that way clearly, but he's not actually looking to take over the entire world. And he also recognizes, even to get to German hegemony in the European region, he knows he's going to have to take some baby steps, and that's essentially what he's going to do. The first thing that he's going to need to do is he's going to have some allies. And so you see Hitler starting to form closer relationships with Benito Mussolini. It makes sense that they're going to ally with each other. Mussolini and Hitler are both fascists. They both want to expand, right? Mussolini just expanded in Ethiopia. And so Mussolini and Hitler are going to start to, I always like to say, become BFFs. It's really going to start when Hitler backs Italy and supports Italy in their expansion into Ethiopia. And so Hitler learns a lot from that expansion. I think the number one lesson that Hitler learns when Mussolini expanded into Ethiopia, that although the British and the French, right, Anglo-French opposition, even though there's opposition there, they don't really do anything to stop Italy. And so Hitler really senses weakness in the major Western powers and an inability to actually do something to stop any kind of aggressive expansion. The other thing that's really important here is that Italy isn't just important to Germany because it's two fascist countries that can potentially be allies in expansion. Italy also is strategically important to Germany because it's right on the southern border of Germany. And so if Hitler can ensure that Italy is a friend, then that means that Germany, in any kind of expansion and in the eventuality of war, Germany's not going to have to worry about its southern border. Hitler is very concerned, even though World War II will again result in a two-front war and then eventually a three-front war for Germany. Hitler doesn't want to repeat that mistake. And so he's going to try and make plans to not have to fight wars on multiple fronts, and a relationship with Italy will help him there. Right. They also share interests in Francisco Franco in Spain. Franco, who is a fascist in Spain, is solidifying power there. He's fighting a civil war, and Hitler and Mussolini are providing him support, and they're learning how to work together in that relationship. Hitler is already come up with his blitzkrieg or lightning war tactics. He knows he can't fight another war like he did in World War I. Trench warfare will just be disastrous for Germany. And so he's testing out those new blitzkrieg tactics in Spain, and is attempting to coordinate with Italy there. So, there's one more major ally that Germany is going to need, and that's going to be Japan. Again, in previous lectures, we had talked about the major powers around the world and how they kind of want to stop expansion, and the rising powers like Italy, Japan, and Germany feel like if they're ever going to reach the top, they're going to have to expand. And so, Hitler wants to expand, Japan wants to expand, and is in fact already expanding. And it seems like this is going to be a good relationship for Hitler. Also, Hitler does, because he believes in a racial hierarchy, he does believe that Japan is one of those races at the top of that hierarchy. And so, not above Aryans, clearly, but up there. So it, again, as far as his racial views go, allying with Japan makes sense there. And so the Japanese and the Germans are going to start to form what they call the Anti-Comintern Pact. Now, Comintern, the Comintern is the Communist International Group that has vowed to spread communism across the world. Well, fascists hate communists, so it makes sense that Germany would be anti-Comintern. But the Japanese don't like communism either. And because China is fighting a civil war between the nationalists and the communists, communism is on the spread in Asia. Russia is the Soviet Union, I should say, is also mostly in Asia. And so the Japanese are fearful of the rise of communism as well. And so Germany and Japan are going to agree to form this anti-Comintern pact to essentially to fight off communism. Now, that's not the only thing they're really joining together for. It's also an anti-democracy pact. Now, that's unsaid. They don't come out and say we're anti-democracy. They choose very specifically to be anti-communism because they know that Germany and Japan becoming allies is going to set off red flags around the world. And so if they want to kind of start to form this alliance, they know that Great Britain, France, America even might try to stop it. But it'll be very hard for those Western capitalist democracies who are in the middle of the Red Scare. It's very hard for them to come out and against an organization that is attempting to fight communism. And so it's a really sly way for Hitler to start to gather together some allies without upsetting the Western powers. Italy will join in 1937. And so essentially, this is the formation of the Axis powers. It's not a formalized alliance system, defensive alliance system as of this point, but the three players are together. And, it's going to only embolden Hitler when it comes to expanding, all across Europe. So it's at this point that Hitler really is going to start to rock the boat or push the envelope or whatever other metaphor you'd like. And so Hitler is, at this point, he's going to start to make good on some of his, foreign policy promises. There's several things that are in Germany's way if Germany wants to expand. One of those is the League of Nations. The League of Nations is very specifically designed to stop countries like Germany, countries that want to expand, right? It's an international body that is, doesn't contain all the world powers, but contains most of the world's powers, and is essentially there to keep the peace. Well, Germany knows that it doesn't want to keep the peace, and it really kind of doesn't believe that that's the purpose of the League of Nations here. And so Hitler sets out to leave the League of Nations. And so when he is talking about leaving the League of Nations, his generals are really starting to question him here. Even though because of the Night of the Long Knives, when Hitler got rid of the SA and killed Ernst Röhm, the military still doesn't quite trust him. And so, his advisors are essentially saying, look, if Germany decides to leave the League of Nations, all of the European powers are going to believe that that Germany is going to start to, get aggressive and potentially expand in Europe. And what will happen is that countries like France will invade Germany. Well, Germany still at this point has a minuscule army. And if France wants to step in and crush the Germans, it can. And Hitler essentially tells his generals, sit down, I've got this. And he comes up with a plan to leave the League of Nations in such a way that really nobody can say anything to him about it. And so what he does is he tells the German representative to the League of Nations, here's what I want you to do. I want you to essentially stand up in the League of Nations and say that Germany is willing to, if all other countries are also willing to completely disarm. Germany, Hitler's Germany, essentially went to the world and said the League of Nations should pass a resolution that all countries around the world should abide by to completely disarm. Well, why would he do that? Well, He does it because he knows that no other country would ever be willing to completely get rid of their militaries. And so Hitler's essentially put all of the nations in the League of Nations and the League of Nations itself. He's essentially backed them into a corner. He's laid a trap for them. And the trap is going to be successful because all the member nations, as soon as Germany announces that they're absolutely willing to completely disarm if everybody else does, they all know that they can't possibly vote for this. And Hitler knows it too. Besides, Germany really has nothing to lose. They only have a 100,000 person military to begin with. And so they're so weak that it doesn't matter. But Great Britain and France absolutely aren't going to get rid of their military. And so, countries take some time. They go home. They pretend to consider this resolution to completely get rid of, all militaries from member nations. And then they come back and essentially say, no, we can't. We're not going to disarm. And they vote it down. And that's when Hitler and his representatives say, aha, see, I told you. Right? This institution isn't about world peace. If they really wanted world peace, then they would have voted to completely disarm and they all would have disarmed. And then we could have that world peace. They didn't vote for it because that's what this international body, that's never what this international body was really about. What this international body is really about is about maintaining power for the countries that are already in control, and which everybody understands to mean Great Britain and France. And so Hitler says, look, I'm not going to be a part of this hypocritical institution. I, Hitler and Germany, we want world peace. They're not interested in it. And so we're not going to be a part of an organization that is just trying to manipulate other countries to keep Great Britain and France in control. And so he essentially says, peace, I'm out. And he leaves the League of Nations. And the rest of the world is just kind of caught with their jaw dropped. And who can make an argument against it, right? And so when Hitler withdraws from the League of Nations, France doesn't invade. They can't. If they invaded now, Hitler would look right. Right. And so all of a sudden now, Great Britain and France and Belgium and these other concerned nations, there's essentially really nothing they can do about it. Hitler pulls out of the League of Nations, and all of Germany that thought if they ever were to do that they'd get invaded. When they don't get invaded, people start to look at Hitler and like, oh my God, he just played the League of Nations and the rest of Europe like a fiddle, right? This guy must know what he's doing, right? And now that the League of Nations is out of the way, Hitler's going to start his next step, which is to secretly start to rebuild his army. And so as he's rebuilding his army, he knows that he can't really rebuild this military in secret, that eventually he is going to get caught building a larger military. Any military worth having is impossible to hide. And so he secretly starts to rebuild this military and focusing in large part on the Air Force. And essentially, and he's coming up, while he's doing this, he's coming up with an explanation for why he's doing it, because as he's building, he is still one of the weaker militaries in the world. And so he starts to formulate an argument to present to the world in case he gets caught building this larger military. Again, his generals are saying, you can't do this, Hitler. This is a bad idea. If we get caught building this bigger military, we're going to get invaded. We don't have anywhere near the military might to stop France from invading us at this point. And Hitler says, guys, calm down. Don't worry about it. I got this. And so he starts building up this larger military and focusing, pretty heavily on not just his ground troops, but on new technology like tanks and the Air Force. Hitler starts to develop the Luftwaffe, which is the German Air Force. And he's doing that in response to what Great Britain is doing. Great Britain has really invested in its own Air Force, the RAF. And so that is a direct threat to Hitler. Great Britain having a very strong navy and a large ground force is all fine and dandy. And that is also a threat to Germany, but not nearly as much of a threat as a strong air force. It just expands Great Britain's reach. And so, Hitler realizes that if he's going to be able to, be any kind of military power, he's going to have to answer Great Britain's, development of an air force, and so he does that with spades, in spades. He does eventually get caught, and he makes the argument to the world: look, we're, the League of Nations is been shown to be a hoax. It's not real, and there's Germany is being threatened as all these new militaries are embracing technology and larger air forces, and so Germany needs to defend itself, and so the world again buys it, and so they realize, like, well, Germany does have a right as a sovereign nation to be able to defend itself. And so, and Great Britain in particular is sympathetic to that. There's this feeling in Great Britain that maybe the Treaty of Versailles was too harsh on Germany. And so they agree to essentially allow Hitler to start to rebuild their military, Germany's military, as long as that military doesn't get any larger than the British military. When that happens, France freaks out. They feel totally betrayed by Great Britain because clearly they share a border with Germany. So a resurgent German military completely puts France at risk. And so the idea that Great Britain's not going to do anything about it, France is upset, but they're not willing to stop Germany on their own. And so Hitler is essentially going to be able to, remilitarize all he wants. Once he's now, and again, his generals' jaws drop. They're like, holy cow, this guy, how's he getting away with this? This just doesn't make sense. The thing is, Hitler recognizes what the German generals don't recognize is that, yes, Great Britain and France are larger world powers and stronger than Germany. They just don't have the stomach to fight, right? They just don't. After World War One, Hitler senses that Great Britain and France are just wiped out, and that they're not going to be willing to stand up to anybody because they don't want a repeat of World War One. Hitler and Germany, because of the Treaty of Versailles, don't really have anything to lose, right? And so they don't have that same negative pressure being put on them to avoid war. So Hitler's next step, again, kind of against the advice of his own generals, is to start to put German troops back into the demilitarized zone, primarily the Rhineland, or which covers the Ruhr Valley. The Ruhr Valley is one of the most resource-rich parts of Germany. It's like kind of the industrial, I don't want to say industrial heart of Germany, but it's a major industrial sector for Germany. It has been invaded by France when Germany couldn't pay back their war reparations. And so this is like a vital part of the German economy. And what Hitler does next is, again, he calls Great Britain and France's bluff, and he starts to position troops into that demilitarized zone. And what he says is, this is sovereign German territory. It is still part of Germany. It's not part of the land that was taken from Germany even after World War One. It is German territory. And he says, look, if I'm going to be a sovereign nation, I can put troops wherever I want within my own borders. And even though that this is going to seriously scare France, right? Because Germany has now moved troops closer to their border. Again, France and Great Britain aren't going to have enough, willpower to stop Hitler. Another reason why France lets this slide is because they think they've built a defensive system along the border of Germany that is impenetrable. That defensive system is known as the Maginot Line. It's like the world's most super trench. It's this insane defensive system with all kinds of reinforced bunkers and underground hospitals and railway stations and all types of artillery and machine gun nests and anti tank speed bumps essentially. It's this massive defensive system that France has just completely blown their military budget on. And so even though the German troops are coming closer to their border, they think the Maginot Line can protect them. Spoiler alert, they're wrong. And they should know they're wrong too, because of World War I. But unfortunately, the French this time period are struggling to adapt to the changes of warfare. All right. So Hitler, now that he's been caught rearming, officially starts to announce these things publicly. And by March of 1935, he announces to the world that he's just outright building the Luftwaffe, this world-class military, this world-class Air Force. And Germany does what it does best. Because of its industrial capacity, it's going to be able to develop all kinds of weaponry, and more importantly than that, because at this point Hitler's, making a whole lot of different weapons, right? He's not making a ton of any one of them, right? And so there's, lots of breadth, but not much depth to their military. But they're embracing new technologies, and they're figuring out what works and what doesn't work. And in the meantime, they're also, because they don't just embrace technology, they also embrace education. They're also training their pilots in a way that many other nations are kind of ignoring. And so Hitler is starting to rebuild. 2 weeks after he announces his Air Force, he's going to announce conscription. Essentially, the conscription is mandatory military service. And so we're going to see really quickly, I think I have the numbers here. Maybe I don't. Right here. In 1 year, Hitler is going to go from 100,000 members of the military to 500,000, and that's just the beginning. And so we're starting to see that Hitler is once again becoming a European military power. And again, all of this done against the advice of his generals. All of this is being done, and everybody in Germany is essentially saying, "You're going to get us invaded. This is going to destroy Germany. This is going to be terrible long term for Germany." And Hitler says, "No, watch this." And again, not because he's necessarily some sort of political genius. I mean, he is an innovator when it comes to politics. There's no doubt about it. And we could say maybe something similar when it comes to foreign policy, but it really all boils down to this. He smells fear in the air. He knows that the countries that are powerful enough to stop him are too afraid to do it. And so, he just keeps pushing through, and nobody is calling his bluff. By the time the Western powers, Great Britain and France, are willing to call that bluff, it's going to be too late. He's already going to be a military, too much of a military power to stop. And then, to add to that, the German people are starting to love him because as, he's defying these Western powers, he's restoring German pride. And so once again, the German people believe, look, we are a great people. And, Hitler's restoring the honor we think that we deserve. Plus, added bonus, it's helping the economy, right? The German economy was a just train wrecked economy. And if the military is building new planes and tanks and guns and, all ammo and boots and uniforms and all that stuff, that's putting people back to work in factories, and that's not to even mention the extra 400,000 people that are now getting a military paycheck that are a part of the military. And so he's putting people back to work. And, I think that's one of those things that I think, helps to explain this kind of crazy loyalty that Hitler has amongst the German people, at least initially during his reign. He restores pride to the German people. He's standing up for the German people. He's constantly, exceeding expectations with this foreign policy, and he's putting people back to work. His next step, and this is where we'll leave off for the day, is Hitler actually starts to move troops into the Rhineland. And so the Rhineland, we talked about this a little bit earlier when we were discussing the demilitarized zone. You could see the Rhineland here on the map. It's the section of Germany, the part in yellow that's got the diagonal lines running across it. It's right on the border with Netherlands, Belgium, France, and Switzerland. It's a large part of the German-French border, and so Hitler is with his movement of military into the Rhineland. He's starting to take back what the Germans believe is rightfully theirs. He's got a plan. He wants to take back all the territory that Germany lost during the World War I and the Treaty of Versailles, and so he's looking to create a pan-German state, a German state that includes all racially German, ethnically German people, and so that clearly is the Rhineland. It's also going to include parts of the former Austrian-Hungarian Empire, and it will include the Sudetenland, which is currently being controlled by Czechoslovakia. Hitler is going to be able to essentially take control of all of those territories without really having to fight. The Czechoslovakians will put up some resistance, but not much. So that's where we're going to leave off for the day. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time, and I will see you next time.